Oh, excuse me. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm supposed to say Mr. Speaker, aren't I? Thank goodness I have the former Speaker sitting next to me to keep me in line. But it is good to be back in the House. I'm a little bit rusty, I'm afraid. Thank you for your patience. Madam Speaker, no offense was intended, but it is good to be back in the House. But wouldn't it be nice if our young people could have a home? That's what we should be working towards. But unfortunately, yesterday we learned that the rates of home ownership are at their lowest levels in a generation. House prices have doubled under this Prime Minister. In fact, when his Prime Minister took office, the average family could afford their monthly housing costs with 32% of their paycheck. That has rocketed up to almost 50%. Vancouver is the third most overpriced housing market on planet Earth. Toronto, the sixth. We have the second worst housing bubble on planet Earth. No wonder 9 in 10 young Canadians say that they cannot even dream of affording a house. And now, from housing to food, we see here headlines. Even the media has noticed. Rents are so high in Toronto that students are living in homeless shelters. Child hunger, a major concern in Canada amid skyrocketing food prices. GTA food banks say they're facing the highest demand in their history. Nearly 6 million people in Canada experience food insecurity in 2021, U of T study says. And then there's energy. I met a young man in Northern Ontario who said he could not afford to put the diesel in his car to go and see his dying relatives one last time hundreds of miles away in Thunder Bay. I met a working man, an energy worker, ironically, who in St. John's, Newfoundland, who said the rising cost of gas meant that he couldn't afford to replace his boots, so he was taping them up with duct tape. Canadians are suffering. Now, why is this happening? Well, the cost of government is driving up the cost of living. $500 billion of inflationary deficits means more dollars chasing fewer goods, leading to higher prices, bidding up the cost of the goods we buy and the interest we pay. Inflationary taxes drive up the cost of businesses and workers to make our goods. The more Liberals spend, the more things cost. It is just inflation, Madam Speaker, and Canadians are paying the price for it. And what has been his response? Well, his first response was to attack the people that were suffering, to call them horrible and disparaging names, to divide and distract. You see, his strategy is simple. He thinks if you're afraid of your neighbor, you'll forget that you can't pay your bills. And so he keeps in place divisive and unscientific vaccine mandates to shut people out of the truckers out of the ability to transport goods across the border, and soldiers who have served our country bravely and loyally out of their jobs. He does this all to stigmatize and attack so that that single mother who's putting water in her kid's milk might forget, he hopes, how badly she is suffering under his watch because she will be afraid of her fellow citizens. Madam Speaker, it is time to replace fear with freedom. It is time for us to all unite. And his second approach has been ever predictable. He wants to raise taxes with a new tax hike on paychecks that will take effect on January 1st, meaning that Canadians will take home less of what they earn. Small businesses will have to pay a higher cost for every single person they keep on the payroll, forcing many to make the painful choice of laying people off. A few months later, on April 1st, April Fool's Day, the Prime Minister will continue to carry out his plan to triple the carbon tax. He wants to increase gas taxes, home heating taxes, and indirectly food taxes because, of course, food requires energy. So this is going to make things worse, and Conservatives have made the demand. This government must cancel all its tax increases on our workers and our seniors so that their paychecks go further and their energy becomes affordable. You know, we in this House have a duty to transform the hurt into hope. And that is what we will do. Because things can get better. There's nothing wrong with Canada, with our country, that can't be cured by what is right with this country. And we have the answers that will counter this inflation and reinforce the purchasing power of Canadians. One, we call for a cap on taxes so that Canadians pay no more to the government and can keep more for themselves. That we call for the government to cap its own spending. And they can do this by simply following the same rules that everyday families follow. You see, if a family decides it wants to build a porch in their front of their house, they cancel their vacation. Or, better yet, they go out and find a deal on lumber, and they look for a way to keep their vacation costs down so that they can do both, but for the same budget. This is how small businesses function as well, but not government. You see, the great Thomas Sowell said the #1 law of economics is scarcity. People always want more than there is to have. And the #1 rule of politics is to ignore the #1 rule of economics. Because politicians are the only creatures in the universe that don't have to live with scarcity. The birds and the trees, the fish and the seas all must make maximum use of limited resources, but the politician just passes on the cost to someone else in higher inflation, debt, and taxes. Well, a pay-as-you-go law would force politicians to make the same either-or trade-offs that everyday Canadians make in their lives. Here's the principle, very simple. The government brings in a new dollar of spending, they should find a dollar of savings to pay for it. All of the existing spending that is in the budget goes ahead into the future, but when governments step into this House to introduce a new measure, they should accompany it with savings to pay for it. You know, they did this in the United States during the 1990s. And that allowed the American government to balance its budget, pay off $400 billion of debt, have booming job growth, record low unemployment, and a massive increase in prosperity. But as soon as they let the law lapse, they went right back into deficit, proving that politicians need the same legal limits on their spending that families follow every single day. Our families have been pinching their pennies long enough. It's time for government to pinch its pennies too. You know, instead of just creating more cash, why don't we create more of what cash buys? Why don't we grow more food, build more houses, and produce more Canadian resources right here in this country? Let's do that instead. Let's start with houses. Like I said, we have the fewest houses per capita of any country in the entire G7, even though we have the most land to build on. Why? Local government gatekeepers stand in the way. In Vancouver, the cost of government gatekeepers, that's permitting, delays, consultants, taxes, for each unit of housing, $600,000 for one unit of housing. It's about $350,000 in Toronto. This prevents people from owning a home. So, well, what I propose is this. The government should link the number of dollars that big overpriced cities get for infrastructure to the number of houses that actually get built so that we have an incentive for them to remove the gatekeepers, lower the cost, and increase the speed of building permits so that we can get more houses. Let's require that every federally funded transit station be pre-approved for high-density housing around it so our young people don't even need to own a car. They can live right next to transit. Let's sell off 15% of the overpriced underutilized and overpriced 37,000 federal buildings so we can convert that into housing. Let's create millions of new homes so that our newcomers, our immigrants, our young people, and our working class people can reestablish the dream of home ownership in this country. And let's put an end to importing overseas oil into this country. Where are the protesters? Where are the Bloc, the NDP, and the Liberal protesters standing in St. John, New Brunswick, to greet all of those big tankers coming from overseas? They say that they're against oil, but they have no problem if that oil comes from foreign dictatorships. 130,000 barrels of overseas oil every single day arriving at our shores and taking our money back to their countries at the same time. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister violates his own sanctions against Putin to send back a turbine so that the Russians can continue to pump gas into Germany so the Germans can fund the Russian war against Ukraine. Incredible. They're against pipelines in Canada, but in favor of maintaining the turbines for Russian pipelines that fund foreign wars. Meanwhile, we have 1,300 trillion cubic feet of natural gas that could be used to free Europe from its dependency on Putin. Meanwhile, bringing back paychecks to this country, we have the ability to produce it cleaner than anywhere else on planet Earth. In fact, the shortest shipping distances to both Asia and Europe from North America are right here in Canada. And you know what else we have in Canada that allows us to liquefy natural gas so it fits on a ship? You know what we have? Cold weather, our most abundant natural resource. That actually lowers the cost of liquefying natural gas by 25%. And with Quebec, Newfoundland, and British Columbia hydro, we can do it emissions-free. So why don't we ship our clean Canadian natural gas to Asia to shut down coal-fired plants there and ship it to Europe to break European dependence on Putin? Let's turn dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people in this country. And let's make work pay again in this country. Let's stop punishing people for the crime of getting up early in the morning and putting in a hard day's work. Do you know that according to a Finance Canada document, a single mother with 3 kids earning $55,000 a year goes out and earns another dollar, she loses 80 cents of that dollar to government clawbacks and taxes. So she makes $25 an hour. She takes home $5 of that. No one should work for $5 an hour. That is below minimum wage, and yet our tax and benefit system punishes her for trying to work a little harder so that maybe her kids can go to camp in the summer, maybe they can join the Little League team. We should reward hard work in this country. We should set out to reward our we should set out to reform our benefit and tax systems so that every time someone works harder, takes another shift, earns a bonus, gets up a little earlier, that they keep more of what they earn. My parents raised me to believe that it didn't matter where I came from, it mattered where I was going. It didn't matter who I knew, but what I could do. That is the country I want my kids to inherit. I want this to be a country again where it doesn't matter where you start off. If you work hard, if you take risks, if you study, if you learn, if you build, if you contribute, that you can achieve anything you want in this country. Right now, people don't feel that way, but hope is on the way. We are going to bring change to this country. We're going to put change back in your pocket, and we're going to make this the freest country on earth. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? Questions and